You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we have bombshell news here, the news that we've been waiting for. Judge Chutkan in Washington, D.C. has unsealed this 165-page motion, this filing that was submitted by Jack Smith. This will form the basis of this mini-trial that will ultimately be litigated to determine what falls under the umbrella of official conduct that Donald Trump could be prosecuted for. So there is a lot in this filing. I'm going to read certain portions here. And Glenn, if you can expound on them and explain what the legal implications of everything I read are, I think that would be the most helpful way to do this. And a lot of what I'm about to read are beyond damning here. So I think we can start off with this. Donald Trump had told certain advisors, and the advisors' names are redacted, but he had told his advisors before the 2020 election that he would simply declare victory before all the ballots were counted. What does that do to Donald Trump, legally speaking?
Brian, the conspiracy was formed long before the results were in, long before all of the votes were counted. I have to tell you, I am plowing my way through this 165-page motion, but our viewers shouldn't think of it as a legal filing. This is the opening statement. This is a 165-page opening statement, and it reads like a darn crime thriller, even though we know who done it. Donald Trump done it. But now, everybody will have the opportunity to see for themselves what Donald Trump did it, how he did it, with whom he did it, and the fact that they had this criminal plan, this corrupt scheme in place to say, listen, we don't care about the expressed will of the American voters. We're just going to declare victory, and then everything we say and do will be sort of to push that false narrative. And I'll tell you, this is probably a 10 on the legal Richter scale, this 165-page opening statement. On a scale of 1 to 10, Brian, it's a 10 on the legal Richter scale. But I have to tell you, on the political Richter scale, this thing is like a 1,006. I mean, I just hope everybody sits back, takes the time to read it, and I know we're going to go through as much of it as we can, as quickly and concisely as we can, but it's no substitute for people to then go back, take the time, and read it, and see what Donald Trump did in these democracy-busting crimes.
Okay, Glenn, the next one here that I want to touch on is that a Trump campaign employee and an alleged co-conspirator sought to foment violence at the TCF Ballot Processing Center. That is the one in Detroit. And I'm going to read a quote here. Quote, "We think a batch of votes heavily in Biden's favor is right. Find a reason it isn't. Give me options to file litigation, even if it is." Then the colleague suggested that there was about to be unrest, reminiscent of the Brooks Brothers riot. And this other co-conspirator responded, "Make them riot, do it." So again, looking to foment violence here.
Yeah, looking to foment violence to disrupt and mislead and try to steal a presidential election. This is another example of it. This is one of what we would call the overt acts. What's an overt act? Well, the criminal conspiracy was formed, and I want to talk in a few minutes about just how big this criminal conspiracy might be based on this 165-page opening statement. The criminal conspiracy was formed, right? We're just going to declare victory, notwithstanding the actual vote count, and then everything we see as we move through this court filing, these things are overt acts. An overt act is basically a step that one or more of the co-conspirators takes toward the commission of the crime. And this fomenting violence at the Detroit vote counting center to try to disrupt the counting of the votes is one of those overt acts. And each and every one will further bolster Donald Trump's criminal responsibility. And I know we're going to move through several of them, but this is relating some of what the co-conspirators said and did. But here is why that's so important. People should keep in mind that once a conspiracy is formed, Brian, everything that every co-conspirator says and does is legally attributable to every other co-conspirator. In other words, once you join a criminal conspiracy, as Donald Trump did, you now suffer the consequences of every crime and every incriminating statement made by every member of the conspiracy. And that is why when we go through what these co-conspirators that weren't Donald Trump, what others did and said in furtherance of the conspiracy, think about it. It's all evidence of Donald Trump's crime that can and will be introduced him at his ultimate trial.
Another point that Jack Smith brought up is that Mike Pence had told Donald Trump that he'd seen no evidence of outcome determinative fraud in the election. Jack Smith wrote, "This was one of many conversations the defendant, meaning Donald Trump, and Pence had as running mates in which they discussed their shared electoral interests. Pence gradually and gently tried to convince the defendant to accept the lawful results of the election, even if it meant they lost." So what are the implications of this, of Donald Trump spreading the big lie, knowing full well that A, he had lost, and we know numerous instances where he was told that he was lost, and B, knowing in retrospect that he would go on to then try to pressure Mike Pence on January 6th into doing something that Mike Pence had already revealed he had no interest in doing?
Brian, this is evidentiary gold against Donald Trump. Why do I say that? Because anytime you have a witness who can testify to a jury, wait a minute, I told Donald Trump myself, and he heard it, and he acknowledged that he heard it, that there was no fraud undermining the election's results. Mr. President, you lost. When you can get that one-on-one conversation before a jury, not hearsay, not third hand, not a news account, not what somebody wrote in a book, but a one-on-one conversation from an eyewitness who can directly tell the jury, I told Donald Trump he lost. He essentially said, I don't care. We're going to keep on keeping on with our criminal scheme by which I'm going to try to steal the presidency. I'm telling you, talk about a nail in Donald Trump's legal coffin. You know, Mike Pence will be a marquee witness at Donald Trump's trial. And the reason this information about Pence becomes more and more important is because the Supreme Court said, well, you know, presidents get to talk to their vice president, so maybe he should have some immunity unless they're talking about crime and corruption, and Donald Trump is acting as a candidate trying to steal an election, not as a president of the United States trying to enforce the laws of our nation. And that is another reason Jack Smith is including this information about a conversation between Pence and Trump by which Trump knew he lost the election, and that provides evidence of Donald Trump's what? His criminal intent, his corrupt state of mind. Huge piece of evidence.
We also have evidence in the filing that Jack Smith will introduce instances in which Donald Trump and his co-conspirators basically made up all of their claims about non-citizens, about illegal aliens voting in the election out of whole cloth. For example, the conspirators started with the allegation that 36,000 non-citizens voted in Arizona. 5 days later, it was a few hundred thousand. 3 weeks later, the bare minimum was 40 or 50,000. The reality is 250,000. Days later, it was 32,000. Then it went back to 36,000. So again, just picking numbers out of whole cloth. What are the implications of this claim?
So, Brian, the fact that they have evidence that they will introduce about knowingly false claims of voter fraud by immigrants or by anybody, dead folk voting, all of that nonsense, it all helps establish that this was a multi-pronged, multi-front effort to try to steal this election by hook or by crook. And they were deploying all of these different vehicles to do that, whether it's pressuring Mike Pence not to certify the results of the election, whether it is insisting that secretaries of state just magically find 11,780 votes, enough to corruptly declare Trump the winner, or by saying there's a whole lot of immigrants and dead folk voting. It is a multi-pronged, multifaceted attack on the election. And here's the other thing. You know, Jack Smith has to prove that these things were not official acts of the president. So the more information and evidence that we see like this, like Donald Trump and his criminal associates conspiring to falsely, knowingly, intentionally, falsely claim folk are voting who don't have a right to vote, that helps take it out of the presidential immunity realm, because it is never an official duty of a president of the United States to get together with his criminal associates to lie to the American people about voter fraud that everybody knew didn't exist. Again, evidentiary gold.
Further proving that point, we have another piece in the filing where Mark Meadows and an unnamed White House lawyer exchanged text messages on December 3rd, 2020, confirming that a statistic that had been repeated regarding dead voters was just outright false. So just more evidence on that exact point. Glenn, we also have another piece in the filing that outlines how a U.S. senator, also unnamed right now, helped facilitate a December 8th call between Trump and the Georgia Attorney General. So what does it mean wherein we have sitting Republican senators who are facilitating calls between Donald Trump and these state officials, where the purpose of them, again, not unlike what we saw between Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, was to attempt to subvert the election or for Donald Trump to wage his pressure campaign?
Brian, a la the movie Jaws, we're going to need a bigger boat. It means we're going to need a bigger indictment. And we are probably going to see a bigger indictment. I'm so glad you brought that reference to a U.S. senator who may be criminally complicit, not completely clear, only Jack Smith knows for sure, but maybe being criminally complicit in Donald Trump's conspiracy. And here is what I was really taken by when I was just making my way through this 165-page opening statement. I have not read it all, but I did jump to the end to see how many people, how many potential co-defendants there are in this indictment. Now, everybody will soon realize, if they look at this 165-page opening statement, that Jack Smith blacked out almost all of the names, and he entered numbers and other designations for all of these people. They are either CC1, CC2, CC3, what is that? Co-conspirator. And we already knew, courtesy of the earlier Trump indictment, there are at least 6 co-conspirators. But then